Real people, real cases. This is Verdict Watch.
You may be seated. Okay. All right, man. You can come back up. Get Mr. Hicks out here. Okay. Did she say she wanted some or she good?
I'm fine, thanks.
Okay. All right, we're back on the record in the case of the people versus Hicks. Witnesses on the stand. Ma'am, I just need to remind you, and I'm sure you know, you're still under oath. All right. And if you, even though it seemed like you just did, but if you need another break, you just say so. All right. And we'll do what we can. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. To those that are in the courtroom, after I had left the bench, there were certain reports to me. I'm not going to get into all the details or who did what along those lines, but I'm just going to say this. I expect that everyone will have proper decorum while they are in this courtroom. There will not be any yelling back and forth or going at each other in any way. If I get any hint of that, I will have you removed. And I will make no bones about it. This is the only warning that you're going to get. This is tough enough, quite frankly, for this witness to testify to, regardless of where you stand on this. And that this other stuff is just not needed, and I will not be having it. So I hope everybody understands that, understands my admonition to you, and understand that I will enforce it. Mr. Bernstein, you may continue your cross-examination.
Yeah, I was asking you about the first time that you heard about Daryl Jr. shaking or twitching. And I think where we left off, I think you had said that the first time you noticed twitching or shaking was when you came home that day.
Yeah.
And I wanted to refresh your memory. Is it possible that you spoke with Mr. Hicks and the social worker about the twitching at the time of the home visit?
No, I do not.
Would it help refresh your memory if I showed you what you said to the police when you spoke with them? Your Honor, may I approach after showing this?
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember.
Okay, I have to get it back from you though, real quick. Sorry. I'll refresh memories. Okay, so after looking at that, do you have a better recollection of the timeline there?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so do you remember a conversation with Mr. Hicks and the social worker about twitching and shaking?
Just to clarify, it wasn't a conversation with the social worker present, it was just me and him on the phone. She wasn't there.
Okay, so you had a conversation with Mr. Hicks on the phone about the shaking? When was that?
That was like, literally, she was walking out of the door and he called. She wasn't present to clarify that it was his nerves. That's what he told me.
I mean, did you tell the officers that you got a call from Senior and the at-home nurse stating that Junior was shaking?
No,
Did you tell the detectives that, you know, that you were told that Junior's arms were twitching?
No.
Do you remember having a conversation with the social worker that you were told that it is normal for babies to do that for the development of their nervous system? Do you remember telling the detective when you spoke with him that in speaking with the social worker, you were told that it's normal for babies to do that for their development of their nervous system?
Yes,
Okay, so there was a conversation with the at-home nurse about the twitching.
after the fact, all of this occurred and going to hospital. Yes, that was discussed.
Did you discuss it? Did you discuss it with the at-home nurse?
Not that they know.
Did you have a FaceTime conversation with the at-home social worker?
No.
Okay. Did you have any
You said
conversation?
at-home nurse, and then you said social worker. Are we talking about the same person?
Yes.
We are, Your Honor.
I just want to make sure his question is directed.
She's technically a social worker, but everyone in the report calls her a nurse, so it's just a little
That's
confusing.
fine. I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same person.
Okay. So you don't remember having any conversation with Mr. Hicks and the social worker together about twitching? You don't remember? Is it possible that you did? Is it your testimony that the first time you heard about the twitching was Mr. Hicks telling you later after the child went to the hospital?
Yes.
You testified earlier when Ms. Tanho was asking you questions that you went home because you wanted to see your baby because you missed him? Is it possible that you went home because you were concerned about some twitching and shaking?
No.
Did you talk to the detective about, I kept hearing my baby crying in the back of my mind and felt that I needed to go home and check on him?
Yes,
Okay, so why did you tell the detective that?
because I believe in God and I feel that God was calling me to go get my son. I don't know why, but randomly, yes, it happened.
Okay. Is it possible that you said those things because you were told by people that your baby was twitching and that you needed to go check on him?
No, I was never told he was twitching or nothing.
When you spoke with Detective Yeager, you said that you didn't have any concerns that Mr. Hicks did anything to the baby?
No.
You didn't say that?
Wait,
Did
question?
Did you tell the detective when you spoke with him that you did not have any concerns about Mr. Hicks doing anything to the baby?
No.
You didn't say that? Do you,
Wait, when you say concern, you mean like in a moment of something happening to my son? No.
Okay.
I wasn't concerned, that's his father.
I want to go back to, you stated, I had asked you about talking with a detective and talking about some of the things that you said about what might or might not be normal for babies to do. Did you read that when I gave you the police report? No?
You don't have to refresh my memory. I'm all over the place, trying to take everything.
I understand. Wait, did you said you want me to refresh your memory?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just show. Yeah. Your Honor, could I approach?
You may.
We're almost done. So look, I'm not trying to like beat you up here. We're just trying to figure out the timeline of everything, okay? I mean, after reading at does that help refresh your memory that you may have had a conversation with the at-home nurse and Mr. Hicks about the baby twitching or shaking and whether it's normal or not?
All I remember is he did call me and she had got there. He hung up before she could talk to me. So whatever him and the nurse discussed, I wasn't on the phone, is what I'm telling you. She never said nothing to me. It came out of the real senior mouth, what she said.
So when you told the detective that you got a call from senior and the at-home nurse, which were your words, stating that Junior was shaking, that what you said is false?
No, I'm gonna,
Oh, is it,
if we can just, I think there's some confusion, so.
There
if we
is.
Phrase,
hold on a second. Go ahead. Stand there. Go ahead.
if Mr. Bernstein could kindly rephrase, I think we could get, and maybe kind of get straight to the point, of asking a direct question, maybe
Yeah.
that would.
All right. And if we could, Mr. Proctor, because I think some of the questions also can have double answers, and I don't know if she's answering what's contained within the question or the question itself, which is making it difficult for me to follow.
Mhm.
So,
Well, let me just,
Sorry, and while I'm objecting, there's been a lot of hearsay and I've kind of let it go to
Yes.
develop testimony, but please be mindful.
well, I'm not offering anything for the truth of the matter. I'm just figuring out the general timeline. Let me just phrase it like this, and maybe this will cut it off. Did you have any conversation whatsoever with the at-home social worker that day? Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. I don't appreciate it.
any redirect?
Deja, are you doing okay to keep going for a little bit? Okay. Deja, how do you feel about being here today to testify?
Angry and betrayed.
This was fall of last year. Do you feel like you have a clear memory of everything or something's a little fuzzy?
Some things are fuzzy.
Defense counsel asked about defendant watching your son Caden sometimes as well.
Yeah.
Before this incident, were you comfortable with him watching Caden?
Yes.
Had Caden indicated to you in any way that he was uncomfortable with defendant before this incident?
Hold on, what? Did Caden say something? My objection is hearsay, Your Honor.
Well, I don't know. It's going to be offered for the state of mind. I'm going to allow it.
Thank you. Do you want me to ask the question again? I know it's a lot. Had Caden in any way indicated to you that he was concerned about defendant being around him or watching him before this incident?
No.
Did that change after this incident?
Yes.
No further questions, Sharon.
All right. I just have one question for you, man. When you came home, you said that you went into your bedroom,
Yeah.
right? Where was the baby at that point?
On my bed in his body pillow.
Got it. Okay. So it was on your bed and, okay,
Yeah.
thank you. All right. Any questions based on the court's questions? All right. Ma'am, you may step. Thank you.
May this witness be excused?
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
This witness is excused.
People call Dr. Carla Parkin Joseph listening.
Doctor, if you could please come forward and be sworn.
Take a seat, raise your right hand. You solemnly swear to affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
See, state, spell your first and last name for the record, please.
My name is Carla Parkin Joseph, CarlaParkin-Joseph.
Humane Corps.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Parkin Joseph, could you please tell the court where you're employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed at Michigan Medicine, the CS Mott Children's Hospital. I am a child abuse pediatrician on the child protection team there.
Thank you. Are you a licensed physician in the state of Michigan?
Yes, I am.
And are you board certified?
Yes, I am.
Could you briefly tell the court about your educational and training history?
Yes, after my undergraduate studies, I completed my medical degree at the University of Toledo College of Medicine in 2010. From there, I went on to my general pediatric residency training at the Children's Hospital of Michigan in downtown Detroit. I stayed an additional year after that 3-year training program as a chief general pediatrics resident, and then continued my training in Philadelphia from 2014 to 2017, and that was for my fellowship training in child abuse pediatrics. I completed that in 2017 and then came back to Michigan and have been at my position at the University of Michigan since 2017.
Thank you. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Before I do so, I'm showing defense counsel Dr. Parkin Joseph's CV, which has been sent to him already. Doctor, I'm gonna hand you what's been marked as people's proposed exhibit number 1. Could you please tell the court what that is?
This is my curriculum vitae.
Thank you. Your Honor, at this point, I would move for admission of the doctor's curriculum vitae.
The objection to that.
All right. Exhibit 1 is admitted.
Thank you. Your Honor, may I publish it to the court?
Yes.
And doctor, have you testified in court before?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
At least 50.
And have you been qualified as an expert before?
Yes, I have.
In what field?
In child abuse pediatrics.
And have you been qualified in child abuse pediatrics in this county previously?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, at this point, I would move to qualify the doctor as an expert under MRE 702.
Could I just ask?
Objection of order.
Could I write your?
You may.
Do you want to come up here?
Sure. Oh, yeah. Thank you, doctor. Just some general questions. So could you define for us the field of child abuse pediatrics, please?
Yes, so it is now a American Board of Pediatrics certified fellowship training. So it is a subspecialty within pediatrics that focuses on all types of child maltreatment. So physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, medical child abuse, all types of maltreatment, and the evaluation, diagnosis, and treatment of those conditions.
Okay, so your patients are children that are the victims of suspected abuse?
Yes, suspected victims, yes. And I'm providing an opinion regarding whether abuse and neglect played a part in that child's clinical institution.
You're trained in like the different mechanisms of abuse, like how this stuff happens and how it relates to the body?
Yes.
Okay. And your training enables you to kind of piece together what may or may not have happened in any way?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. Well, when you say potentially, what do you mean exactly?
So at times there is a history that is provided or a potential mechanism of an injury, which I would kind of relate to the medical knowledge in the field to see if those injuries are consistent, with the ultimately diagnosed injuries as well. So sometimes there is a history that is provided to at other times, probably more difficult is when there is no history, in order to really pinpoint an exact cause.
Okay, that's fair. And so if there's no history provided, there might be some limitations on your ability to say something.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I'll have more questions later, but Judge, I have no objection.
All right. Without objection, the doctor is so called.
Doctor, were you involved in evaluating a patient named Daryl Hicks Jr.?
Yes.
And how old was he when the case came to you?
I believe he was 7 weeks old. I saw him.
When and how did the case come to you?
So the case was brought to my team, the child protection team, after he had been admitted to CS Mott Children's Hospital, and other medical professionals had concern for physical abuse as a cause, or as a due to the injuries that were identified in Daryl.
And I'll ask you some questions about that, but before I do, did you personally observe Daryl Hicks Jr.?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, if I may approach, before I do so, showing defense counsel People's Proposed Exhibit number 2. May I approach?
Yes, you may.
Doctor, I'm handing you People's Proposed Exhibit number 2. If you could please tell the court if you recognize what that is.
Yes, this is a photograph of Daryl in his hospital bed. And this is what he looked like at the time I observed him.
And when you say Daryl, are you referring to Daryl Hicks Jr.? Just to be clear. Thank you. Your Honor, I would move to admit People's Proposed Exhibit number 2 at this point.
Any objection or voir dire?
None, Your Honor.
Exhibit 2 is admitted. Thank you.
So when you saw Daryl Jr., what did you note upon seeing him or examining him?
So he did have many medical interventions that were already in place. So he had EEG, which is electrodes that are placed on the scalp in order to monitor brain activity. He also had a monitor that was actually placed inside his skull operatively to monitor pressure inside his skull. He was intubated and mechanically ventilated, so he had a tube placed down his throat in order to help him breathe. And had a number of other vascular lines, so IVs and other access.
Thank you. And what was the process in evaluating him medically? Could you tell us about that?
So in addition to my physical examination, I also gathered history by reviewing medical records. So what was available in the University of Michigan medical records. And also reviewed laboratory testing, so blood work that had been completed, as well as radiology studies. Daryl Jr. had a CT scan of his head, MRI of his brain, had X-rays performed as well. So I reviewed those personally and with a radiologist as well.
I want to kind of take them one at a time. So you mentioned the CT scan. Could you tell us what the results of the CT scan indicated?
So the CT scan was performed just a few hours after Daryl Jr. had presented to the hospital. And that CT scan showed evidence of swelling of the brain, in addition to some scattered areas of bleeding or hemorrhage inside the skull that appeared to be between the surface of the brain and the inner surface of the skull.
And what did those injuries indicate to you? What would those suggest?
So the bleeding inside the skull would suggest potentially some trauma. And then with the swelling and the signs of poor blood flow and oxygen flow to the brain would again suggest that there was some injury that occurred.
What did you do next after the CT scan, or what was done next?
So after the CT scan, Daryl Jr. was admitted to our pediatric intensive care unit. And just a few hours after that, actually into August 31st, he had an MRI of his brain as well.
And what is the purpose of the MRI following the CT scan?
So there are some limitations to the CT scan. It does not give great pictures of the brain tissue itself. Just to get a clearer picture of the injury that we're seeing inside the skull, and also again to look at that brain tissue to see if there were any additional injuries.
And what were the results of the MRI?
So it confirmed again that there was bleeding or hemorrhage between the surface of the brain and the inner surface of the skull. And again, showed evidence of poor blood flow again and poor oxygen delivery to the brain. There was pretty diffuse brain injury at that point.
And did that confirm what the CT scan had shown? And did that provide any additional information on top of the CT scan, or is it more of a confirmation?
More confirmation.
And what was the next procedure after the results of the MRI came back?
So I believe that he had the X-rays done next. We call that a skeletal survey. So it's a set of X-rays, usually about at least 20. That looks at all of the areas of his body, so from his skull all the way down to his toes and hands, and to evaluate for any skeletal injury, any fractures, broken bones.
And was there anything concerning on the X-rays?
In Daryl Jr.'s right tibia, which is the bone that you can feel in the front of the shin, but down at the end nearest his ankle, there was a bony fragment that was seen on the X-ray that suggested potentially that there was a fracture at the end of that bone.
Did you also, what did you do after the X-ray was completed?
So I believe after the X-ray that Daryl Jr. was taken to the operating room with the pediatric neurosurgery team. And that is when that monitor was placed inside his skull to monitor the pressure inside.
And what was that monitor indicating?
So at the time that it was placed, the goal would be for the pressure to be approximately 15 millimeters of mercury, but at the time of its placement, it was in the mid-20s. So it would suggest that there was certainly increased pressure inside his head.
Was there also an eye exam conducted?
Yes, there was.
Okay. And could you tell the court the results of that eye exam?
So the pediatric ophthalmology team evaluated Daryl Jr. And they found hemorrhaging or bleeding in the retina, which is at the back of the eye, in both eyes. Those areas of bleeding in the retina were diffuse, just meaning widespread, and really covering all of the retina. They were very numerous, too numerous to count, even to individualize each of the spots of bleeding, each of the hemorrhages. They were also in multiple layers of the retina. So they were just very widespread.
And based on your training and experience, what does that suggest to you?
So that pattern and the nature of those retinal hemorrhages is most consistent with an abusive etiology that is seen typically with an acceleration, deceleration type injury.
Is that what's referred to as kind of shaken baby or a shaking movement?
Yes.
You mentioned that you reviewed other medical records. Did you review birth records for Daryl Jr.?
Yes. Daryl Jr. was born at the University of Michigan, so there was access to that information, as well as his pediatrician records as well.
And was there anything from the birth records or the pediatrician records that indicated any concerns related to or would be associated with the injuries that you saw?
Really a normal delivery, and really normal, pediatrician.
And when you say pediatrician records after, are those like well visits essentially
Yes.
for the baby? And those were normal as well?
Yes.
After evaluating Darrell Jr., reviewing the medical records, taking the history, putting it all together, did you have a diagnosis?
It was like diagnosis.
Okay. And what was that diagnosis?
Abusive head trauma or physical abuse.
Could you please tell the court what injuries were specifically consistent with the diagnosis of abusive head trauma?
The inside the skull that I described, as well as the diffuse swelling of the brain, likely secondary injury to the brain as a result of that lack of blood flow and lack of oxygen delivery to the brain, as well as the retinal hemorrhaging. Again, it was of a pattern or nature that would be most consistent with abusive head trauma. And then ultimately, with further imaging, there was also confirmation of the fracture described at the, on the right tibia.
And with the confirmation of the fracture, what's that indicative of when you see a fracture like that in a case like this?
So this particular fracture was just described as a corner fracture, which just meant that it looks like there was a chip off the corner of the bone. But at that location, typically those types of fractures are due to some shear forces at the joints, as well as tension, so almost pulling apart of that joint as well. So in the medical literature, those particular types of fractures are highly specific for abusive injury, and they have been reported to be associated with shaking, so that the extremities are kind of flailing, and then that produces those tensile and shear forces at the joints that would cause these types of injuries. At other times, the corner fractures have also been described from like a yanking on an extremity, or even picking an infant up by that extremity. So almost using that extremity as like a handle or lever.
Okay. In these types of cases, when a patient is presented to the hospital, do you instantly look for, was this abusive or not, or do you start in a more general fashion?
So yes, the medical team definitely started with a more broad differential diagnosis. So thinking about all the possibilities that could lead to the seizure-like activity that Darrell Jr. actually presented with. So there was consideration given to other neurologic causes of seizures. Did you have, epilepsy or some kind of, again, seizure disorder that might be causing this? There was consideration given to infection. So it was placed on antibiotics as well. But again, the imaging that was done really pointed towards.
Okay. Based on your training and experience, what's the relationship between the severity of the injuries and onset of symptoms?
So in abusive head trauma, the more severe cases will typically present more immediately, so closer in time frame to their development symptoms.
And was this a case you would, where the injuries would be classified as severe?
Yeah.
One moment.
Yes.
Nothing further right now. Thank you.
All right. Cross-examination.
Doctor, I'm going to pick up where Ms. Tanha left off. She talked about the onset of symptoms. And it seems like, is it possible that twitching or shaking is one of the symptoms that might go along with these types of injuries?
Yes.
How long would you estimate that the onset of twitching or shaking would arise after such an injury like this?
I would say my best guess would be hours at most, but could be even shorter as minutes after an injury.
Okay. How many hours, like at the maximum?
With like seizure-like activity, I would say maybe up to 24 at most.
Okay. When that twitching or shaking is observed, I mean, is it fair to say that it's important to bring a child to the hospital right away?
Yes, if there's seizure-like activity. Like
In looking, in one of the, something that happens along with the injuries is that the brain doesn't get oxygen, right? And that can result in further injuries.
correct, yes.
In your notes, in the medical records, it seemed like you had a concern for medical neglect.
Initially, yes.
You thought that Darrell Jr. had evidence of hypoxic ischemic brain injury.
Yes.
Could you explain that?
So hypoxic just means low oxygen, and then ischemic meaning that there's no blood flow. So
Okay.
what I was describing, I just didn't use those ones.
Sure. It seems like in your notes, you stated that injury presented at the time that he came to the hospital.
Yes.
And in your notes, you write that the development of like such a problem, may have been affected had the child been brought to the hospital sooner.
Yes, I think, identification of a problem and then evaluation and treatment of that problem would absolutely, yes.
Okay. Okay. You said it could potentially change the outcome. How is that? Like the treatment could reverse or not reverse, but like help prevent it from getting worse?
Yes, I believe that, yes, if he was treated in a timely manner, the medical professionals might be able to slow the progression, of that, injury as a result of lack of blood flow and oxygen delivery.
Okay. It seems like when we're talking about the abusive head trauma, the shaken baby stuff, it's the brain moving around in the skull, right? That leads to the bleeding and the swelling.
Yes.
And you had testified that often that can be from acceleration or deceleration,
Correct, yeah.
like a back and forth movement.
Yes.
It also can come from like impact as well.
Yes.
And something like in this case that, we don't have any evidence of like, skull fracture or anything, right?
That's correct, yeah.
But this type of injury could be caused from an impact with like a soft surface,
Potentially.
like a couch or a mattress.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you about further these types of injuries. Could this be caused, if a child is like aggressively picked up from the armpits and like rocked back and forth?
I would expect the injury would be violent and repetitive as well. So I don't think that it would occur from typical.
What about if the child was picked up and then the child's head hit something like the person's arm?
If that was the only injury, I would not expect this substantial injury.
What about, and I'm going to ask you if all these things in combination, I'll just save the suspense, what could possibly add up, right? What about picking up the child's head without support and the head like flop back?
Again, I would expect it to be repetitive. So I would not expect this pattern of injury with that history.
What about dropping the child onto a bed?
Again, I wouldn't expect the extent.
But dropping a child on the bed, that could lead to the brain moving around, right?
Yes.
And once that brain moves around, that can lead to swelling of the brain.
Well, if there was injury to, brain tissue, cause that swelling.
Right. So, and I had asked you earlier if the brain could move around and like that type of scenario and impact with a soft surface. And you said that the brain could do that. And then also, I guess that leads from it that the brain could, there could be bleeding from that kind of impact as well, right?
Yeah, well, I think bleeding from the movement of the brain inside the skull, yes.
Okay. And I mean, all the actions I'm describing, in some way, there's like a lack of support to the head, right?
Yes, so the head would be basically able to move somewhat freely.
And that's part of the problem with shaken babies is that the head is not being supported while something else is happening, right?
Well, yes, there's, repetitive, again, forces being applied to the child's head.
Right. And if there's not support to, stop the acceleration or deceleration, that's when problems arise.
Yes, that's when that bleeding happens. That's when the injury to the brain and swelling can occur.
I heard you say that you had a diagnosis. It was like a most likely diagnosis. I'm gonna have to ask you what that means, most likely diagnosis.
So I was not present and did not see immediately, before or kind of what the inciting event specifically was. But in, again, evaluating Daryl Jr. while he was in the hospital, there was what we call a differential diagnosis. So which is basically a list of possible problems that could lead to his clinical presentation. Through the course of his hospitalization, through the imaging, the lab testing, then the medical team was able to, rule out some of those possibilities. And then some of those, studies also provided support to other possibilities. So once everything was completed and injuries that I outlined previously were found, I believe that abusive head trauma is most likely diagnosis.
And we had talked earlier about like limitations in coming up with something. Were you able to read any police reports?
No, I only read police reports.
Did you have access to any statements from the parents as like the investigation went on about, admissions or statements about what happened?
I believe, yes, that I had just conversations with police about some possible histories or mechanisms of injury.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. I have no more questions.
All right, any redirect?
Just a few. Doctor, how important, if at all, is the history you receive from, let's say, a caregiver or parent when a child comes to the hospital?
So I believe it's important so that medical professionals can kind of tailor the treatment, to or again kind of move those potential diagnoses around in that list of what's more likely. So if we're given a history of an injury or a potential injury, then we might be able to kind of look for additional injuries, or again kind of potentially get to imaging and diagnosis sooner.
So would it be fair to say that it's important that history is as accurate as it possibly can be?
Yeah.
Thank you. You were asked about kind of different scenarios where the baby's head might hit a person's arm, where the head might not be supported. Would any of that describe or be consistent with the injuries that you saw in Daryl Jr.?
No.
Including the fracture to the tibia?
That's correct, yes.
And you were asked why you call it a most likely diagnosis, and of course you said it's because you weren't there, you didn't see what happened. Is that common in your field of work, is that there there aren't people who are what we would call witnesses to what happened.
That's correct.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Can I ask one follow-up, Your Honor?
You may.
Doctor, you said you had access to the University of Michigan records. Did you also have access to the records created by Tia Braxton?
I believe so. She is part of the Metropolitan Health Program.
Well, she is the at-home social worker that does the home visits. And were you able to review those as well?
Yes.
Did you review the notes for the day that Daryl Jr. was admitted to the hospital?
Yes.
And are you able to share what those notes say?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. At this point, that's hearsay unless there's some reason there's not.
Respond.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out how what's in those notes plays a role in her diagnosis.
No, I get that, but I'm going to sustain the objection.
Okay. I guess we'll have to ask her.
Thank you. Anything else, Ms. Tan?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, doctor. You may step down. This witness can be excused. No objection. This witness is excused. You may call your next witness.
We will call Dr. Carl Schmidt.
Almost. Doctor, please come forward to be sworn.
Take a seat, raise your right hand. You solemnly swear and affirm the testimony you're about to give be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God. State and spell your first and last name for the record, please.
My name is Carl, C-A-R-L, Schmidt, S-C-H-M-I-D-T.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hi, Dr. Schmidt. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience. Dr. Schmidt, could you please tell the court where you were employed in August of 2024 and in what capacity?
At the University of Michigan Department of Pathology, professor of pathology, also deputy Washington Continental Exam.
Thank you. Could you please tell the court about your educational background and training?
I'm a physician, licensed practice president in Ohio, Michigan, and Washington State. I have residency or specialty training in anatomic and clinical pathology, then I have subspecialty training in forensic pathology, and I am board certified by the American Board of Pathology in anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathology.
Thank you. Your Honor, if I may approach and I'll show defense counsel what's been marked as people's proposed exhibit number 3. He was also sent that before the hearing today.
Is it 3? Yes, you may. Go ahead.
Dr. Schmidt, I'm handing you what's been marked as people's proposed exhibit 3. If you could please tell the court if you recognize what that is.
Thank you. Your Honor, I would move to admit the CB, people's proposed exhibit 3.
Any objection or voir dire?
No objection.
CB is admitted to exhibit 3.
Thank you. Dr. Schmidt, have you testified in court before?
I have
Approximately how many times?
at least 400 to 500 times.
Have you been qualified in court as an expert before?
I have
In what field?
mainly anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathology.
Thank you. Your Honor, at this point, I would move to qualify Dr. Schmidt as an expert under MRE 702.
Any objection, voir dire? Pardon?
No,
All right.
that's a lot of, court appearances.
All right. And this witness is so qualified.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Schmidt, could you tell us a little bit about what forensic pathology is?
Forensic pathology is the branch of pathology that studies how and why people die, the changes that occur in tissue as a result of the process of death. Not only with trauma, but also with natural disease. And we also look at laboratory testing.
Thank you. And as part of the position you had in August of 2024, and I'm sorry, August and September, I should say, of 2024, did you perform and supervise autopsies?
Yes.
Could you just briefly tell us the procedure for autopsies?
So the autopsy is basically consists of two parts. The first is where you do a basic general exam of the body that includes things like height and weight, as well as looking for evidence of disease as well as injury. And after you're done with that, then you proceed to what is probably more popularly thought of what happens during an autopsy, where you open the cavity of the head, chest, abdomen, and pelvis, look at the internal organs, and you make a correlation with what you see in the internal organs and the external findings, if that is well.
And did you supervise the autopsy of Daryl Hicks Jr.?
I did.
And as a part of the autopsy process, would you complete a report documenting findings and conclusions?
Yeah.
Was a report completed in this case?
Yeah.
Was it completed at or near the time of the autopsy examination?
It was sometime after the autopsy exam because there were several procedures that we had to do that were started at the time of the autopsy, but could not be completed until later.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you a little bit more about the procedures in a moment. Before I do, Your Honor, may I approach, again, I'm showing defense counsel what's been marked as people's proposed exhibit number 4, but he should have that as part of the discovery.
All right. Yes, you may approach.
Thank you. Dr. Schmidt, I'm handing you what's been marked as people's proposed exhibit number 4. Could you please tell the court if you recognize what that is?
This is a copy of the autopsy results generated in the case of Daryl Hicks.
And how do you know it's associated with the case of Daryl Hicks?
Because it has his name on it and it has an autopsy number generated as part of the Washington County Medical Examiner record keeping. It also has an autopsy number, which is the way that it's kept track in the Department of Pathology and State of it.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this point, I would move to admit people's proposed exhibit number 4 into evidence.
Any objection or voir dire?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, exhibit 4 is admitted.
Thank you. May I approach with exhibits 3 and 4, Your Honor, to publish? So Dr. Schmidt, I'm going to ask you some questions about that report, but before I do, at the conclusion of the examination of Daryl Hicks Jr., was there a determination as to the cause of death? And what was that determination?
Abusive head trauma.
And was there a determination as to the manner of death in the case of Daryl Hicks Jr.?
Opposite.
Could you please tell the court what injuries you noted on Daryl Hicks Jr. specifically that led to those determinations?
Well, the first is that he had something called diffuse subarachnoid hemorrhage. So the brain is covered by a very fine membrane, which has a very rich blood supply. And when that membrane becomes implicated, hemorrhage, that's what we say, like, it's subarachnoid. So basically, the entire surface of the brain was painted with this subarachnoid. Then there were scattered subdural hemorrhages. Basically, there was a subdural hemorrhage is a hemorrhage that is a clot that occupies the space between the skull and the surface of the brain. So a subarachnoid hemorrhage will sit on top of a subdural hemorrhage will be sitting on top of a subarachnoid hemorrhage. So it's a sandwich, if you will. You have the skull, then the subdural space, then the subarachnoid, and then the brain itself. Another way to think about a subdural hemorrhage is that when you open the skull, you peel away a subdural hemorrhage, whereas a subarachnoid hemorrhage is painted on the surface of the brain. A subarachnoid hemorrhage is an indicator of trauma. And in this case, it was basically all over the surface of the brain, called diffusely spread across both hemispheres, especially more weighted towards the left side of the brain. But the subdural hemorrhage extended down to another structure of the brain called the cerebellum, which is kind of like a smaller version of the brain that's seated next to the brainstem. So I guess the long and the short of it is that there was extensive subarachnoid, basically covering the entire surface of the brain, except for a small patch. Then there was what we call diffuse hypoxic ischemia. What that means is that the brain was deprived of oxygen because of decreased circulation. When this child suffered the trauma that resulted in all this hemorrhage, there was inflammation of the brain. And as the brain swells, there is an increase of pressure within the skull. The skull is basically a hard enclosure. And as the brain tries to swell, well, there's not much room for the brain to swell because the skull is itself helping to contain the pressure that builds up. And at some point, pressure builds up to the point where it exceeds the ability of blood pressure to pump blood through to the brain. So that you get what we call the hypoxic injury, which is basically that loss of blood flow that happens to the brain as the increase in pressure within the skull impedes the ability of blood to flow into the brain. I hope that.
Thank you.
And then there were patches of hemorrhage within the cortex. You will see that the autopsy report, there's something called diabetic. What that means, it's a bruise that happened because of tearing or sliding of the cortex over the white matter inside the brain. It's basically two layers of brain with different densities sliding over each other as the trauma was inflicted. And when that happens, there are blood vessels that are keeping those two layers of the brain together and they get torn. So you get the hemorrhage, which we call tearing contusion. Then there was the hemorrhage in the retinas and the optic nerve. So to do that, we look at the eyes directly, and there was hemorrhage within the retina, which is the pigment, that black pigment layer in the back of the eye. Like that was also infiltrated. Hemorrhage. There was hemorrhage in the optic nerve, the right optic nerve, as it comes out of the eye. And there was also hemorrhage in the neck. At the spinal, there are 7 cervical vertebrae, and in levels 5 and 7, there was hemorrhage in the nerve roots that come out of the vertebrae, out of the nerves out of the spine at that time.
Thank you. Did you note anything in particular regarding the essentially the skeleton, if you will, like bones? Was there anything noted?
No, well, not in the head, but there was a fracture of the right tibia injury to the growth plate.
Could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
So it was in the bottom of the tibia, what we call the distal tibia, which is from the ankle to the knee. And basically there was trauma inflicted to that part of the leg, which resulted in breaking the growth plate. And you can see that there was hemorrhage in the growth plate, and we actually removed that part of the leg and took sections from it to look under the microscope, and you could see that there was hemorrhage there.
So going back to the injuries you observed in the head, what does that indicate to you? What does that suggest to you may have happened to cause those injuries?
You can think of injury as a transfer of energy to tissue. There is no injury that happens without hemorrhage being transferred to tissue. So this is a pretty extensive injury. The diffuse subarachnoid subdural hemorrhage, intense swelling of the brain that caused the pressure of the brain to rise to a point where it basically heated blood flow into the brain. All this is a catastrophic event, which which leads me to think that something really bad happened in this child very acutely. I can't tell you exactly what it was. For several reasons. One is this child had actually survived for 8 days, 6, 7, or 8 days after he was admitted to the hospital. But this child was either shaken, that's one possibility, or his head was impacted against a padded surface. A padded surface would help spread out injury, and thus you would not see any injury on the skin as a result of being struck on a padded surface.
When you're conducting these examinations or supervising them, do you also consider the history of, did this child have a normal birth? Have there been any previous issues prior to the onset of symptoms that led to this? Okay. In this case, was there anything that had occurred, to the best of your knowledge, that would lead to these injuries from the medical records prior to this child coming to the hospital in August and September?
It was not.
And how does that play into your diagnosis?
Well, it just lends weight to the diagnosis of trauma as being the reason behind all these changes.
And you mentioned, you used the word acute. Could you describe to us what you mean by that?
It means that a lot of this happened in a very short period of time. This child was apparently well until the moment that he wasn't, and then he developed seizures, became abducted, and was taken to the hospital. This happened within a very narrow period of time, which is supportive of the fact that this was a major injury suffering.
I do want to ask you about going back to the tibia, the right tibia. And you noted acute fracture of the distal metaphysis at the, I'm not going to try to pronounce all of that, but I'm referring to page 8 out of 10 of your report.
Okay.
What type of movement might cause that kind of injury to the tibia?
What? Hold on one moment. Young man. Yeah. Yep. side, Mr. Hannah.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Might want to move to the side. Bring him up here. What's your name?
Ashton, you know,
Pardon?
Ashton.
I gave a warning. You were in here when I gave the warning.
Wow.
No, don't even try it. I saw how you walked out. I saw how you looked at him. I saw how you flipped your head. I didn't want to see that. I asked that everybody be respectful to everybody else. All right, so if you come back in this courtroom ever, you make sure you behave yourself accordingly. Understood?
Yes, sir.
You can go.
Doctor, I'm going to ask you the question again, referencing page 8 out of 10 of your report regarding the right tibia. What type of movement might cause that type of an injury?
This can only be caused by one of two things. One of them is the leg was impacted against the surface such that it caused the growth plate to get displaced. This is not a fracture like in an adult where the bone hits something and because of the impact at that point, the bone splits. This is cartilage. It's growth plate. So instead of bone kinking, it kind of gets displaced, like shearing one end of the tibia over the other. And the other possibility is that it was squeezed. That's how we think these things are fractured.
Would something like a light squeeze cause a fracture like that?
No, to cause a fracture like that, paralysis, I think requires significant amount of pressure.
Thank you. Nothing further.
All right. Cross-examination.
Doctor, so I want to ask you about the potential of blunt force impact. I think your testimony was that, this could be shaking, this could be a blunt force impact that couldn't be excluded. Could you describe what is a blunt force impact?
Blunt force impact is when a body part strikes an object such that it can leave behind a bruise or not, but there is no actual breaking. So for example, if I strike you with my fist, that would be an example.
Okay. And that cannot be excluded in this case.
Correct.
You spoke about, in the blunt force impact, that would be an acute occurrence, right?
Right.
You talked about how injuries are the result of like an energy transfer. I'm sorry if I didn't use the right words that you said.
That's correct.
How much force are we talking about that would be required to produce such an injury?
I can't tell you in numbers what actual force is needed. There is literature from the motor vehicle industry that have looked at how much energy can be generated in a motor vehicle accident. You can find dummies, for example. But in this case, suffice it to say that this is a significant injury that required a significant amount of force just because of the extent of the injury.
And I think you had talked about how the injury is so diffuse. Could that be related to the blunt force impact on a soft surface, making it so diffuse?
Yes.
Okay. You had said that it would be a significant amount of force to result in the injury in regards to a blunt force impact, but you're not able to describe, like in numbers, what that would look like. Are there any studies or anything out there that you could point to help me read on this that would describe that, or do we not have that?
As I said, the motor vehicle accident literature does have references mainly regarding crash testing and the like.
Okay.
But this is not something that you can actually do because you can't.
Right. So it's fair to say there, and if I'm hearing you right, there's not studies on this because it's impossible to actually study it.
Correct.
So there's estimates, but we don't know for sure. Let me ask you the same thing about potential shaking. I mean, do we know what type of force would be required in a shake to cause an injury?
No. No, there are papers that talk about, not just the energy, but how fast the head needs to vibrate and so on. But it's obviously an experiment that you really can't do. What we know about shaking is because there have been published articles by pediatricians such as Suzanne Starling that look at cases of subdural hemorrhage with swelling of the brain that were taken from individuals that confessed actually like this. And their value lies in that many of these stories were actually, many of these descriptions of shaking were actually obtained before there was a diagnosis of shaking babies.
So okay, if I could sum up then, it's fair to say that we can't say that such a shake would cause such an injury, right?
That's right.
And there's no way to really get a firm answer on that.
Right.
But you can say with medical confidence that it could be, either a shake or either a blunt force impact.
Right.
Thank you. Those are all the questions that I have.
Can you redirect?
Just briefly, Your Honor. Thank you. Doctor, I want to ask you about the fracture again to the right tibia. Was that fracture a fracture that had healed as if some time had passed, or was that a recent fracture?
Recent.
And as far as you were aware, and at the time you performed this, or as you're sitting here now, Daryl Jr. was never in a car accident.
Right.
Thank you. Nothing further.
All right.
No other questions on that, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, doctor. All right. How many more witnesses do you have?
Your Honor, I actually have no further witnesses, and I was going to ask, I've had Deputy Singer waiting, and I'm not intending on calling him, so if he may be excused, I'll make sure he gets home.
All right.
Well, I'm going to call Detective Yates then if Ms. Tanha's not going to.
All right. So why don't I do this? While we prepare for that, you can then release your witness. I'm going to take a recess. We'll come back and we'll continue. Court is standing in recess.
Thanks for watching Verdict Watch. New court drama every day. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a case. Leave a comment with your thoughts. We're watching too.